Okay, I think we'll make a start. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So this afternoon we are going to do a short presentation in regards to our earthing assessments. Can we move on to the next slide, please? I'll just do some general housekeeping, similar format to our previous online webinars. It is a 40-minute presentation, which will allow sort of 20 to 25 minutes for any questions at the end. The session is recorded and the slides will be made available following the session along with the recording. You can submit any questions using the chat function that can be found at the top of your screen. Alternatively, you can raise your hand. We will be taking some natural breaks throughout the session, so if we can ask that you remain on mute until we break for any questions. Okay, so can we move on to the next slide for me, please, Gareth? Thank you. So the purpose of today ultimately is to give you an overview of the earthing assessments, the new process following on from our 2018 update. Okay, so just sort of meet the team that's on the call today. So the presentation will be delivered by Gareth Freeman, who is our Connections and Capital Manager, and Chris Greenfield, who's a strategic planning engineer. They're going to walk you through the process and what's changed. You've then got myself, who is the Incentives and Connections Engagement Manager, so I'll be here to facilitate the session. Mike Doward, who is Connections Charging Manager, so Mike is available for any questions. And likewise, Hannah Sharrett, who works with myself as the Regulatory and Stakeholder Engagement Manager. And then finally, Brian Hoy, who is Head of Market Regulation. So Brian's available for any questions also. So I will hand you over to Gareth now, who's going to take you through the first part of the session. If I can ask that just to assist with the bandwidth, that you keep your camera off just until we get to the questions section, and likewise anybody at E&W will, unless they're sort of presenting, will turn their cameras off. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Amy. So hello, my name is Gareth Freeman, and yes, Connections and Capital Manager, and I'll provide an overview of the Connections Assessment. Okay, so between 2018 and 2019, E&WL undertook a large-scale update of Code of Practice 333. We provided briefings in 2018 to provide an update to ICPs and IDNOs on what was required. Now with this, I would like to provide a reminder of our obligations for earthing. Now, earthing is for safety and is in place to provide safe operating conditions under a fault scenario, allowing protection to operate correctly. As part of this, we are required to adhere to several license requirements, namely EREC S34 and ENA Technical Specification 4124. We are also bound to work within the ESQCR regs, especially Regulation 8, which specifies that earth electrodes are designed, installed and used in such a manner so as to prevent danger occurring in any low voltage network as a result of any fault on the high voltage network. We are also bound by many other acts and regulations, for example the Health and Safety Work Act. Now, in January 2019, E&WL went live with our biggest update, Code of Practice 333 in years. This was to help provide clarity and ease of earthing assessments to you by breaking into 3 methods of assessment. Now we broke into 3 types because this made it easier to fulfill the task of designing, assessing and constructing earthing, as each type assessment required varying levels of workload. This allowed you to focus on a quicker, more efficient route to approval, while providing greater detail only when required. To help with this change, E&WL agreed to undertake earthing assessments for a short period of time. But from the 5th of July this year, the requirements will be passed over to yourselves. So I will now provide an overview as to what is changing via flow diagrams. For the existing process, we will provide a connection offer, and once accepted, give an indication as to whether the site was hot, cold, and whether it was a type 1, 2 or 3 for assessment. You would then submit an earthing design, and we would either reject and ask for more information or approve. When it came to energisation, you would submit an earthing measurement after construction, and we would again either reject pending result matching design and or hitting the required value, or approve allowing for energisation. The new process is slightly different, where we will issue a connection offer including the running routes and primary or potential rise information. Upon acceptance, you will complete your earthing design following your earthing assessment, and we would again either reject and ask for more info or approve. The construction and energisation phase would remain the same. Now, to help deliver on this requirement, we have provided 3 value-add tools to help with the assessment. The first is a Record of Practice 333. Since go live in January 2019, we have refined and embedded our process further following stakeholder feedback to make the process of earthing approval as smooth as possible. Our next tool is the Network Asset Viewer. This works similar to GIS technology and has been live since May 2020. It is an interactive, intuitive tool designed to reflect the current structure of our network and provide data access, which is easy to navigate through. Finally, Strategic Planning have produced a spreadsheet that is easy to complete and helps you understand what type of assessment is required. It pre-populates and provides information on how to follow the process for earthing assessments and where to get the relevant information. On top of this, we'll provide webinars leading up to July on how to use each of these tools effectively. Now, before I hand you over to Chris, I would like to provide a high-level overview of the 3 types of assessment. Now, type 1 is your global earthing system. It is typically found in urban built-up areas. It is cable-fed, where the level of interconnection for earthing systems in the surrounding area is so great that there is no dangerous touch voltages. This makes the design very easy to complete. It is a tick box exercise, which Chris will explain later on. Type 2 is typically found in your suburban areas. It is not part of the global earthing system, and the best way to think of whether it's a type 1 or type 2 assessment is looking at the feeding network. Is it a mixture of cable and underground, or like cable and overhead network? And if that's the case, then it'll be your type 2. Standard ENWL designs may be used in this instance. Type 3 you find in your typically very rural network. It's a potential hot site and mostly overhead line network. Type 3 assessments require the most amount of work, and a bespoke earthing design is likely needed. Just with that, Amy, was there any questions raised?
No questions at the moment, but just before we move on to the where we'll go through the assessment categories, is there anybody that would like to ask any questions as yet?
Hi, yep, myself.
Hi, Mark.
Hi. Sorry, yeah, Mark Stewart, Energy Assets. Sorry, you mentioned there was a spreadsheet just in an earlier slide. Is that? Yeah. I missed this. Sorry, did you say it's going to be released later on, or is it already available?
So it's going to be released later on, and we provide a webinar on how to use it along with the nav and the code of practice.
Right, magic. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Mark.
Okay, thanks for that. And with that, I'll pass you over to Chris Greenfield, our strategic planning engineer.
Okay, thanks for that, Gareth. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Greenfield. As Gareth said, I'm a strategic planning engineer. I'll now take you into further detail on what we require for each type of earthing assessment and give you some more information on how you can complete them. So type 1, shown on this slide, is a simple tick box exercise. The study is designed to be completed quickly, and provided all criteria is met, will determine whether your site is located within a global earthing system. If all criteria is met, provided you are using a standard ENWL earthing design, your site will be classed as type 1. Once we approve your assessment, you can go ahead and construct your site. Energisation will be subject to a final site measurement of 10 ohms or less, which you will need to provide to us and prove on an earth resistance test, such as a fault potential test, the results of which need to be sent to us for approval. So the screenshot on the right shows our Type 1 GES tab on the earthing summary spreadsheet. So how it works, it provides you with a list of criteria which must be met for Type 1 GES. A simple yes/no box, which will be filled out by yourselves, will tell you whether each criteria meets requirements, and if so, we'll pre-populate a required evidence and resource box, which will show you what you need to provide and how to provide it. Okay, so the next slide, Gareth, please. So if your site fails to meet the criteria for a Type 1 assessment, you will now be required to carry out a Type 2 assessment. So you will need to show that the substation is safe for touch potential and that the site is cold. So the design effort is minimised by firstly assuming an initial 10 ohm earth mat resistance for the calculations. Calculation methods are shown in ENA ER S34, and you can use the S34 formulas either as part of hand calculations, or you may already have a calculator tool that repopulates an outcome based on formulas. This study, where possible, will be a desktop exercise, and online sources can be used for soil resistivity. However, if the earth potential rise exceeds the 380 volt safety factor, then on-site soil resistivity test will be required, such as a Wenner test. The lookup tables are provided in Code of Practice 333, which show the touch potential limit and earth resistance for all ENWL standard earthing designs, and this avoids the need for a bespoke design study. Again, as before, an earth resistance value of 10 ohms or less will need to be proved on an earth resistance check and provided to us prior to energisation. So high-level requirements for a Type 2 study are shown in the blue box below. To assist you in being able to successfully carry out a Type 2 study, we will be running further training at a later date. A screenshot from our Type 2 tab on our earthing summary spreadsheet is shown next to it, and you will see that you need to show your findings from your assessment and write down the conclusions into the summary table. And further information on Type 2 studies can be found in Code of Practice 333. So next slide, please, Gareth. So if you are not using a standard ENWL earthing design, or your Type 2 study has shown the substation is potentially hot, you will need to carry out a Type 3 study. So for this, you will need a full earthing report using appropriate earthing software, which simulates your earthing design and calculates a resistance with an associated EPR and touch potential contour. Online sources are not allowed, and on-site soil resistivity tests will be required. Once the earthing for your site is installed, an earth resistance check will again needed to be carried out, and the value of which must meet that which has been shown in your earthing report. These studies will be detailed and are necessary to ensure that safety is met. Further requirements for a Type 3 study are shown in the blue box above. Underneath is a screenshot from our Type 3 hot site tab on the earthing summary spreadsheet. You will need to meet the criteria shown and supply the applicable evidence that will pre-populate based on the outcome from the given criteria. Next slide, please, Gareth. So this slide shows the additional information that we will be giving out with the POC report. This includes the different feeding routes that we would like you to assess. For each primary that needs assessing, we will give you the earth potential rise information and its associated resistance. And we are giving you this to make things easier for both of us. For us, so you know what you need to assess, and for you, so we know what we'll be expecting back. Yep, so next slide, please, Gareth. So I'm going to talk about a quick overview of the process. It's split between study guidance and construction guidance. Firstly, you'll be carrying out your assessment to determine if your site is type 1, type 2 or type 3. Once your assessment is complete, you will need to review the outcome and summarise it into our ICP Earthing summary spreadsheet. Alternatively, you may use your own spreadsheet or outcome table, provided that we have approved it beforehand. You will need to gather any required evidence or information and submit these separately, for example, design drawings or maps. Once you have all the information to hand, you can send these along with your design approval into competition and connections, and we will review them. Next slide, please, Gareth. So once we have approved your design, you can then go ahead and construct it. Before energization, again, you need to carry out an earth resistance check, such as a full potential test. And as I said before, it needs to be 10 ohms or less for a type 1 or type 2 assessment. For a type 3, you must achieve a value in line with that in your report. With the test complete, send the results back to competition and connections. We will review them, and if the test is within the required limits, then energization will be granted. Yep, so that's the end of the slides. We want to have a little break.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have any questions now before we move on?
Sorry, Mark Stewart again.
Hi.
Sorry, I just realised after I asked the first question. See, with these spreadsheets, is there a date lined up for when they'll be released, or is it just kind of still TBC?
What we're hoping to do, Mark, is we're going to sort of gauge how many people would be interested in the training sessions and provide an overview of the spreadsheet and some sort of training as to how to use it before they're sort of issued out to you.
Okay.
I don't know if you've got anything more to add to that, Gareth.
No, I think so. Once you provide the initial training, then we'll be keen to circulate them just so you could feedback and then get used to them before the July date.
Yeah, I'd be very interested for one.
That's fine. That's no problem.
Cheers.
Hi, can I ask a question, please? Jonathan Harper from Power and Connections.
Of course.
Hi. It's just something that you said, Christopher, which was about the type 1 and type 2. Did you say that if we weren't using a standard ENW earth map that we would have to automatically go to type 3?
Yeah, so with the if you're not using a standard design, we don't know what the touch potential will be or the EPR, so you will need to carry out a design check on earthing software with your alternative design. So then you'll prove that it's safe and cold.
If we were using, if we were using a standard earth map for the substations that we were installing, would we be able to get to a position with the NW where that earth map could become a standard like yours, where if it's installed like that every single time, it would fit into category 1 or 2?
Yes, I believe you can do that. We've done that before with other designs from ICP. So if you're going to be using that design quite a lot, you can send that to us. We'll review that. We'll determine whether it's safe and available for use on a type 1 or type 2, and we'll get back to you. So then you wouldn't have to do the type 3 study for each study you're going to be using that design with.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mark Stewart again. Just a follow-up question. Just along the same lines as Jonathan Harper, really. See, for these kind of standard setups, I take it internal substations are going to be always a type 3, or is that going to be kind of a standard scenario get produced or released? Or
are you talking about integral substations there? So inside a building?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, integral, yeah.
They are not necessarily going to be a type 3. You need to ensure that it's safe inside the substation. And then in terms of the amount of earth electrode, you need to install it to meet surface current density requirements. And provided you've achieved 10 ohms or less, and you've met the criteria for a type 1 or type 2, it will it will be available as a type 1 or type 2. That will be the outcome.
Right, okay. So you'd require the earth mat to be inside the integral substation as well as, yeah, sorry, I mean, a current example we've got the HV electrode coming out of the room. It's not going to be essentially inside the room. But yeah, there's really kind of more of our questions leading there. I take it that would be a type 3 scenario then, because there'll be no earth mat inside.
So what we've done in the past, you can retrofit a mesh or concrete rebar underneath your equipment, right. And then you can run earth electrode outside the building. You'd have your ring electrode outside the door, provided that's the same area as a type 1 or type 2 standard design, and it's 10 ohms or less on full potential test. We would accept that as type 1 or type 2, provided that all the other requirements for a type 1 or type 2 are met.
Right, magic. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
For me, just to follow up as well, could you outline the process of getting the substation building, the standard design approved? Yeah, on the back of this meeting, it doesn't have to be right now. Like, could you send that out with the slides or something so that we all know how to get our standard substations on the approved list to get a type 1 assessment done on those?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah. That for you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Okay,
I think we'll move on. Please, Gareth.
That's brilliant, no worries. I'm just going to talk you through the network asset viewer now. So as I said before, it is an interactive, intuitive tool designed to reflect the current structure of our network and provide data access, which is easy to navigate through. And it works similar to GIS technology, and it's been live since May 2020. So as you can see from the diagram here, it covers the entire EMWL patch from Carlisle all the way down to Macclesfield, kind of Buxton way. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see a link that we'll send out afterwards that gives you access to the network asset viewer. It is used to search all EMWL assets and find the information you need in terms of addresses, cables, cable types, poles, substations and towers. It gives you the ability to navigate through the entire asset base. You can click on the asset and it gives you relevant information in terms of cable size, number of conductors, whether it's been laid direct or if it's in duct, what type of construction in terms of whether it's aluminium or copper, and all the other relevant information. An example here below is of a HV66 cable, 300 XLP. I believe this is in the middle of Manchester. And what we've done in this one is just click over the asset, it highlights it in grey and gives you all the relevant information in terms of size, construction. It's actually laid in ducts, as it says here, and the voltage type. We also have a measuring tool in the nav that allows you to measure the length of cable, so you can use that for your calculations. So the next part of the presentation is I'll outline the next steps in terms of this process, and then we'll give further time for any questions. So the next steps. It is important to note that not much has actually changed with the process, and we are here throughout the whole thing to support in terms of webinars and further training. Earthing studies have always been undertaken by ICPs, and we've only undertaken assessments as an interim measure. You will be required to submit your earthing assessments and designs from the 5th of July 2021, and we will provide online training sessions for your teams in the forthcoming months. Now, if you require any further clarity after this presentation or assistance, please email the CIC mailbox on cic@enwl.co.uk. And with that, I'll move to the question section of the presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Gareth. Do we have any questions? I mean, please feel free to pop them into the chat function if need be.
Hi, I have a question if I could.
Hi, Hugh. Yes,
Hi.
of course.
So I'm not actually an ICP, but ICP subcontract to my company. So will I have access to all these tools as well?
Yes, of course. We can certainly arrange that for you, Hugh. I'll follow up with you offline as to how you can request access for NAV, and we'll certainly be sending the slides on and provide any assistance if needed.
Okay, thank you. I have another question as well.
Okay.
So about fault current distribution calculations, did you mention you allow S34 calculations?
Yes. Yeah.
Would you be open for EMTP as well?
As far as I know, we just do S34 for now, but I can find out for you whether we're allowed to use them ones as well.
Okay. Cheers.
I've got a question. There's more for the audience though. I guess one of the things we just like some thoughts on in terms of the timing of doing. We're proposing to do some follow-on sessions to go through this in a bit more detail. So it's probably, you know, targeted at the sort of practitioners that are going to be doing this in practice. We're kind of in two minds. What's the best time to do that? Whether we do something, you know, fairly soon, like in the next month or so, or whether actually people would prefer it closer to the kind of go live date, or we do, you know, some in the next sort of few weeks and then do some later on. Just welcome thoughts on what works best for people, whether they're keen to kind of get their heads around it and therefore something sooner would be better. But then if they're not going to use it for a bit of time, then you can forget it. So just welcome thoughts from people as to what would be the most effective way for the timing of it.
Hi, Brian. I think from my perspective, it would be a good thing for it to be soon so that we could sort of almost critique the process. So we could give you any feedback before the go live date and make any changes. I'd be happy to pass the training on to my team on how to use it once I'd received it. But if you're offering it twice, it'd be even better. One close time to my team for sure.
Yeah, we're gonna put it just in the little survey it's run. So we welcome just some feedback on how many people would be interested and how many in their company, just so we kind of get some idea of numbers. Because whilst it'll probably be like this and doing it virtually, but obviously if you get too many people, it makes it harder for people to ask questions. And the next one will be probably a bit more sort of technically focused, and sometimes that prompts even more questions. So so we kind of don't want to. We want to have a kind of manageable number on, you know, so you can do it for 550 or 500 in some ways, doesn't make any difference, but it's more manageable in terms of the numbers of people we're talking to, just means interactions a bit better. So we're thinking we're probably going to do, you know, a couple at least, and let's say, you know, if the general feedback is doing one sooner so people can get their heads around it, then that's really helpful. Any other thoughts on it from anyone else?
I'd be the same boat as Jonathan Harper, and I can speak to my manager and whatnot to see kind of what our team's thoughts are. But yeah, I'd probably be the same boat as Jonathan to say sooner rather than later. Just it would also help maybe just kind of get questions, maybe FAQs together. I don't know.
Yeah. But
yeah, I appreciate, you know, if you want to keep the, you know, the group size small, then, you know, I don't know, just yeah, I'd rather be in that group if that's possible.
Yeah. Brian, sorry, I have a question that's been put forward. Just a suggestion that the training would be better as soon as possible to give ICPs a chance to understand what's required and acceptable before we go live.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I mean, if that's consensus, that's fine. That's what we'll do. That, I mean, to be honest, that's why we're trying to do this with plenty of notice, so we're not rushing into it, because we know from experience when we launched the Earthing change in policy in 2018, it's very technical and tricky, and it causes problems. So we wanted to give people plenty of advance notice. That's why we're doing it today. So because this is not a major change, most of the work is stuff that you're doing. It's just that assessment, whether it's a 1, 2, or 3, is the only bit that currently we're doing, and we're going to sort of revert that back to yourselves today.
Hi, Brian. It's Paul Wallen here.
Hi, Paul.
Brian, your earthing is very similar to UK Power Networks, isn't it?
I believe so. I think it's no coincidence that we use the same consultant, so we're developing it. So yes.
Well, that was what I'm going to say. Is basically your earthing policy reads the same as their earthing policy. So I was just wondering whether the calculations and the examples are going to be similar to what UK Power Networks use.
I have no idea. I'll defer to one of my colleagues maybe to answer that, Paul. I don't know.
Yeah, we've had that question from somebody else as well. So, yeah.
Is this an example to work through in the training, do you mean, Paul? Or?
Yeah, well, to be fair, I've done a couple of design approval submissions with earthing calculations for UKPN for a couple of jobs down in London. And I've just managed to seem to have got my head around that. I'm just wondering whether it's going to be the same for your area.
I mean, if it's something that you can share with us separately, we can actually have a look at that. And because if it's, if they're real life examples that we can actually use to walk through, or obviously we need to relocate them to the northwest. But if those situations that are commonly arise, then that might be something that Chris and Gareth can incorporate into the.
With regards to how they do their calculations, they have a list of the standard substation drawings with their standard earthing arrangement. So for them, they have standalone substations, brick built, standalone substations, GRP, integral substations, and they basically have an ohmic value that's associated with those drawings. And you basically use the calculation that they've given you for that value of substation within your calculation for the design. So obviously when you get your point of connection and you do your submission, they then send back the details of the radial from the primary. And then obviously you use the calculations to determine your values. And then obviously you do the earthing resistance prior to connection and the earthing resistance after connection. You put that on a form and then submit it. They all oversee that. They check through the calculations. If it meets the valuations, they sign it off and issue it back. And again, if it needs more calculations or a more detailed study, obviously you employ somebody to go and do the soil resistivity and all the checks. But everything else is taken from the EA documents with regards to the earthing system, and they're all sort of found on tables with regards the ohmic value per kilometre per ohmic value per meter. The whole process itself is very complicated, and we're trying to come up with a way to simplify it going forward. Now, because we've done a couple of design submissions with them, we've come up with a standard type of arrangement drawing. We're just wanting to know whether we can do the same thing with yourselves.
So, Gareth, Chris, did you want to?
Yeah, as I said previously, Paul, if you're coming up with your own standard arrangement and you want to submit that to us because you're going to be using that design frequently, it wouldn't make sense for you to do a sort of full study on that design each time, so we could then approve that, and then we'd know it would be available for a type 1 or type 2, depending on all the criteria is met.
Brilliant.
Just to add on to that as well, even for our type 2 assessments, we do use a standard ohmic value for the Earthmat, around 10 ohms. So that sounds similar to the way the UKPN are doing theirs as well.
Yeah, I think overall, Paul, I think we want to try and make this as simple and painless as we can, but I recognise it's complicated, and at the end of the day, it's a safety issue for everybody. Your staff, our staff, and the public. So, it is unnecessary. It is necessarily complicated in some cases, but the more we can actually streamline that and make it as easy to use as we can, that's what we'll aspire to do. And we're going to have a look at the a bit more detail at the UK Power Networks one, and if you've got some examples that you're able to to share with us, then we can look at that in the meantime before July. That'll be
I can dig out the two designs that we've done with UKPN and the calculation sheets and send you a copy of the drawings and the calculations if that's of any help.
Yeah, I think that would help. I think the process you described, Paul, it sounds very similar to what we'll be requesting you to do come July.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you.
We've got a few people who've had their hands up for a period. Jason, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Hannah. I've got a question for Christopher, if that's all right.
Yeah.
We've had a few schemes that we've had to do a type 3 study on. Back in the days when Bill Halliwell was still with you. A couple of the sites were quite tight. We didn't really have the space on the site to carry out a full earth resistivity study. So what we agreed with Bill at the time was that we could go to 3 remote locations around the site, take values there, and if we had a homogeneous value, then we could apply that to the site that we were working on. Would you still accept that methodology?
So with the soil resistivity tests, we generally require 2 tests going out in different directions to 27 meters, and that'll be a WENA test. I do appreciate that in some situations in urban areas, for example, it is very difficult to get a test. The way I've done this is you can go and get your test in a location that is near as possible to the substation, and then I will then compare that with the BGS database. So just to make sure that it's within similar lines and we're not completely off between what the online resource says, what the BGS says, and what your soil resistivity test says. So we just want to get it as accurate as possible. Alternatively, yeah, so we want it as accurate as possible. Obviously, if we are in a built-up area, we're not going to be able to go out to 27 meters. So if you just go out to nearby adjacent fields, yeah.
Yeah. So what we've done in the past, Chris, is where we've been restricted on the actual site, is we've gone to 3 separate locations in relatively close proximity to the site, but in absolute opposite directions, etc. Taken 3 results, and if the results have been homogeneous, then we've applied that data to the site. But I take on board what you've said as well. That's another option to review some of the data, so that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I think in principle, Jason, we've got to be sort of pragmatic about this. I suppose, we don't want to give an answer that says, yeah, that's all right in every situation, because there might be something better that can be done. But obviously, at the end of the day, if we can't, our policy is designed to work most of the time. And if you get a situation where it can't work, then just engage with us. We'll have to have that discussion and work out what's the next best solution, really, which might be the 3 points geographically dispersed, or it might be something else. But we can have that conversation. It's easier to do it on a specific site to work out what's the best way to get the most accurate view of the earthing.
Spot on. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers, Jason. Richard, do you want to go? You've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. A couple of projects we've got at the moment, which are type 3. So we're doing our own site-specific bespoke earthing study on it, and of course that will establish what your touch and step potentials are and ensure that the design is compliant and within limits. But ENW seem to still default to the policy position where they want 50 mil earth wire run out up to 200 meters where applicable, which seems a bit counterintuitive. Is that a policy position that you guys are intending to follow through under the new revisions when we do these three?
Thanks, Richard. Gareth or Mike, are you able to comment?
Hi, Richard. I think we'll have to take that one away and just go back to policy and double check with them. But we'll come back to you on that separately.
Yeah, I think
that'd be great.
Yeah, it's not something we've looked at in this, Richard, because this sort of transition of this over is not affecting the actual policy per se. It's just kind of working out whether it's type 1, 2, or 3. But it's something certain, as Mike said, we can just double check with our policy team and say, or if it's a specific problem in specific circumstances, then let us know, because that might be the other option that they may want it most of the time, but accept that sometimes it's not possible.
Yeah, I understand you can't have your cake and eat it. So if you're doing type 1, type 2, you're not going through the site specifics. It's a default position, and I understand perhaps why ENW want that additional wire run out. But if you're going through the effort of a site-specific and improve, it's not a card that adds no value. Then all it's really doing is reinforcing the ENW network, which perhaps isn't quite consistent with sort of minimum cost scheme, competition and connection. So that's perhaps why I raised that.
Thanks, Richard. Amy, just before we bring in the questions on the chat, I just wanted to double check with Hugh. You did have your hand raised, but you've dropped it. So I just want to make sure that your question's been answered and you don't have a further question.
No, thanks for checking. I'm all good. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay. Amy.
Thank you. So we have a question from Ben. Ben, do you want to have a chat about? You've said soil resistivity results are required if you jump to a type 3, not for a type 1 or 2. You think that's off the top of your head? Do you want to expand on that, Ben, or? Oh, sorry, no, Mike. What I'll do is I'll reach out to you after the session then, Ben, and we'll and I can clarify some of those points for you.
No problem. Sorry, Amy, just to clarify, I think if I understood the question right, if Ben's still there, it's type 1 we would need soil resistivity. Type 2 is you wouldn't unless the it goes above a certain value of 380 volts, and then we would require a site visit to take the soil resistivity test, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it's an option on type 2, isn't it? That if you take the on-site readings and it's low enough, then you can use just a standard design.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's agreed that that's right. Thanks for that, Gareth. So if we just move on to the next slide for me, please, Gareth.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for joining us today. You will notice in your chat function there is a poll that we would like you to complete if possible, please. It only takes 30 seconds, just for us to understand really whether you've benefited from today's session and whether you would be interested in joining any of our subsequent training sessions in the forthcoming months. Just following the usual format about keeping informed with us, your feedback is priority for us. Please feel free to sign up to our distribution list and keep your eye peeled on our events page for any further events coming up, including the training sessions. Alternatively, please don't hesitate to drop me a message at ice@enwl.co.uk. The slides will be made available after the session, and the recording will be distributed to you all once the appropriate editing has taken place. And like I said before, your feedback is key to us. So if there is any comments that you'd like to make us aware of, you can either drop those into the chat function, or we'll be available for a couple of minutes offline if you'd like to discuss something separately. And that's it from me. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We finished a little bit early, so if there are any questions, feel free to take advantage of the panel that is available today. Thank you.